30 or so seats, has ended up giving the women getting all the less favourable tough seats. So it wasn't. I don't think that was a good idea, and probably won't be repeated. Hope it won't.
The man in the corner over there, and then the.
Yeah.
And then
can I just ask you whether you think the constituency system will survive? There is a movement, not one that I'm convinced by, to move to some form of PR and possibly have elections on wider regions with perhaps closed party lists. What do you think about that? Do you think the constituency system is fit for purpose and necessary, or is it really something of a fiction?
Well, we've seen in Scotland and Wales, you can have a PR system which still involves constituencies, although, so in other words, you have some MPs who are elected for constituencies and others of whom are elected by a list, from a list, and a sort of a nationwide list or a regional list. But inevitably that means the constituencies are bigger. As to whether, I mean, there's something to be said for that, and certainly there's a lot to be said for PR. As to whether it's going to happen, well, actually, we could have PR very, very soon. If things, I mean, if, for instance, Labour ends up with, say, 30 votes, 30 seats, short, say with 300 seats, so it's 25 short of the majority figure, 325. Starmer needs support from somebody in the Commons. Well, the SNP is not a very appetising process as a proposition as a partner. So he's obviously going to look to the Lib Dems, who could well have 30, 50 seats in the next House. Now, Ming Campbell, I noticed on the radio, said yesterday, the only thing Davey should be going on to Starmer and saying is, we want PR, no deal without PR. Now, Starmer is adamantly saying, no, we're not going to propose PR. But the Labour Party at its conference last year actually voted for proportional representation. So you can see circumstances in which Starmer might have to concede proportional representation to get the Lib Dems to support his government. Although, of course, I think he'd probably have to have a referendum on it after that. But nonetheless, it's one of the big unspoken, undiscussed issues at the moment. I'd keep an eye on it if I were you.
yeah. Excuse my ignorance, but do would-be candidates? Yes.
Do would-be candidates to be MPs have to write full CVs and personal, as well as personal statements, not just 200 words? And if so, why can't all the potential selectors, i.e. local members, get to read all the details? Because I've always been very frustrated not being able to know all about my potential future MP, even councillors. You can read personal statements, but you can't find out everything about them.
I agree. I mean, we're talking here about when people stand for public election, aren't we? It's astonishing how little candidates for public elections, be they local elections or Westminster elections, say about themselves. And they frequently don't say on their election leaflets what job it is that they're doing right now. It's the only walk of life where you go along to prospective employers and say, will you employ me please? And you don't reveal to them what your current job is, which is absurd. Now, of course, that's sort of understandable, I suppose, if you're an estate agent or a banker. But I think, it's, and I pointed out, if I see it, I say, why haven't you put it on the leaflet? Are you ashamed of your job? No, I suppose in one or two cases they may not have a job or they might be unemployed, but they can at least say what they used to do or what they're hoping to do. It's amazing how little they say about themselves, and that's also part of what and that also is true, by the way, in the internal selection processes. How the websites they put up and the leaflets they put out to try and become Labour candidates. You don't really do that sort of thing, the Conservatives, but Labour people do. In fact, there was a time when there was an agency in Warrington, well, I think it's still there, who offers to run the campaigns to become a Labour candidate and will charge up to £10,000 for doing so. Now, quite how that fits in with the spending limits, which are based on the number of members in the seat and are roughly, you know, £1,000 or £3,000 spending limit, I don't know, but I suspect if the person who spent £10,000 is the favoured son or daughter of Starmer's henchman, then the fact they've overspent is overlooked. I don't know of anybody who's been reprimanded or disqualified for it. And by the way, I say Starmer's henchman. I don't actually think that Starmer knows much about what's going on in the selection of his candidates. I don't think he wants to know much about what's going on in the selection. Now, basically, he said to these guys who were doing it for him, you get on with that, and you know the kind of people I want, and it's left it at that.
We've got time for one more question. I don't make sure there's nobody over this side.
Sorry.
Okay, who have we got? Well, that's tricky, isn't it? Let's have, okay, I'll do two. And then gentleman.
Who's next?
Then this gentleman.
Well, thank you, Michael. That was amazing and really shocking. I had no idea. So different from the days when I tried to be selected.
Oh, come now.
But the thing I was going to ask you about was Isabel Hardman's book, where she writes about the selection and the amount of money it costs candidates. I was appalled by, and the time. So if you need to earn a living and you get selected for some candidates, then expected to be full-time candidates.
Oh, I agree entirely. It's and that is something that perhaps the state could help remedy. What it means is that if you have a wealthy partner, spouse, if you have an employer who's sympathetic, and often these people work, you know, for MPs in Westminster or for the party or for trade unions, that's great. But if you work in a a job where you're not in a managerial position, you've got to work long hours, you can't take the time off, you can't suddenly say, I need 8 weeks holiday to campaign in this seat. It's very, very difficult. And you've got the expense of the selection process in the first place, what I've been talking about here, which, you know, you may need to give it several goes, and each time it's expensive, and all the train travel and the car travel and going around the seat and buying everybody drinks goes into thousands and thousands of pounds. And then, of course, as you say, once you're a candidate, that can be very expensive as well. People don't think about this when they say that our MPs are overpaid and they're all fiddling their expenses and so on. A lot of that doesn't happen anymore, or maybe I'm being naive. I do think, and of course, the cost problem means it's much easier for wealthier middle class people to get chosen than it is for people from poorer backgrounds. And there are one or two groups that do give people grants. There's a women's group that, I've forgotten what they're called now, that Stella Creasy runs, that you can apply to and get £1,000, £2,000 to help you with your selection campaign. So that helps in a way. And then there are, I think, one or two on the Conservative side as well.
Last question. Yeah.
Do I wait for a moment?
Shall I come down?
Thank you for a very entertaining speech. I agree with most of what you said. Do I press something?
Yes,
Hello?
Well, why don't I come down and...
I think I've got it going.
All right, okay.
Yes, I was saying thank you for a very entertaining speech, and I agree with most of what you had to say. What did surprise me, though, was your claim that you had to have some degree of association with the constituency that you wanted to represent. Because from my understanding from the media, you had to be a spad. You had to have come out of university, gone straight into one of these think tanks, and been an advisor to a minister, and then you got parachuted in to a safe seat. And the general feeling was, no, that shouldn't happen. We should be electing people with local associations and some experience of industry.
I'm afraid what you're saying is a bit out of date. I mean, there was a time, and not long ago, 10, 15 years ago, when the Miliband brothers and Ed Balls and Yvette Cooper and a whole load of others, and David Cameron and Nick Clegg, George Osborne, all of whom had acted as senior advisors in Parliament, did get slotted in. I don't like the word parachuting because it's pejorative, and I think they got slotted in. They got help, often at the last minute. And I haven't spoken about the last minute thing. If an election's been called, then the party high command will say, oh, well, we haven't got time to go through all the normal selection procedures. Here's your short list of 3, and again, it's the short list I described with the Archangel Gabriel and so on, and with people like Ed Balls in the role of the Archangel Gabriel, and and the same on the Conservative side, and so really the constituency's got no choice. So there is that kind of slotting in does still take place, and there are some Downing Street special advisors who've been chosen, for instance, in this round, but only a couple. And there'll be more later, and there'll be more on the Labour side. But it's a lot harder for these special advisors. I mean, special advisors have got a bad reputation these days, and this emphasis on being local is so powerful. So what it means is that the special advisors have basically got to go back to where they came from. Well, that's all very well if you come from a town that is the same party as you are, but if you're going back to Surrey and you're Labour, or you're going to South Wales and you're Conservative, it is very difficult. I mean, I have nothing against special advisors. They are very, very clever people, and they know their way around government and Whitehall. And I actually do think I can understand why the party leaders will be slotting people in at the last moment in order to get their senior aides onto the front bench and into ministerial positions. I'm not sure it'll ever be as bad as it was under Tony Blair. What he used to do, if an MP said, well, I'm going to retire at the next election, Labour MP, Blair or Blair's office would say, well, don't do it, don't announce it yet, leave it till the last minute, leave it till after the election's called. And if you do that, we'll give you a peerage. In other words, delay and we'll give you a peerage. And that then meant that the party could say, right, it's too late to have the proper selection, and we can then basically slot our people in. And they did that in lots of seats. And Blair admitted to a friend of mine not long ago that one of the worst regrets he had as party leader was all the duffers that he'd ended up putting in the House of Lords in order that he could get hold of their seats. And if you look at some of the people he appointed to the House of Lords, it's clear he was talking. There was a bit of a row about it at the time. I remember there was a guy called John Gilbert, who wasn't really a duffer, but he was MP for Dudley, and he played hard to get. He said, "Okay, well, I'm only going to give up my seat if you promise me a minister. I'll be a minister in the next government, as well as being in the House of Lords." No, actually, first of all, he said, "I'll give up my seat if you make me ambassador to Washington." And Blair's office made it clear that was going a bit far, but that he could be a minister for 2 years, and then he could go and be in the House of Lords. And so eventually he gave up the seat. So they then rustled up. They said, "Right, Charlie Faulkner, who was Blair's great legal friend, former flatmate. Right, it's your turn, Charlie. You go for the seat." So Charlie goes before the National Executive Subcommittee, and the first question is, "Where do you send your children to school?" Faulkner has to admit that 2 of them go to St Paul's and 1 goes to Westminster, all the other way around. Right, that's the end of him. And they then went through 2 other candidates before they found an MP for Dudley North, for Dudley. But the great irony is that probably one of the most outstanding Labour candidates this time is a young man, well, young, 36, called Hamish Faulkner, who is standing for Lincoln. And he went to Cambridge and Yale, he's worked in the Foreign Office on kidnap cases, and he's clearly got intelligence connections of some kind. And he will be elected MP for Lincoln, probably be Foreign Office Minister or Foreign Secretary before long. And so there we are. Charlie Faulkner didn't get the seat because he sent his kids to public schools, and now one of those kids is going to be a Labour MP.